The envelope sat on the kitchen table for 11 days before I opened it. It was a standard white business envelope, the kind you'd get from a clinic or an insurance company, with the printed return address in the upper left corner. My mother-in-law Drusilla had slid it across the table toward me at her dining room, the one with the long mahogany surface that could seat 14, and she'd done it the way you slide something toward a person you want to watch flinch. My husband Calloway sat beside her. His sister Petra sat across from him. They were all very still. The envelope said Holloway Regional Genetic Diagnostics and my name was on it, and the flap was already open. I left it there. I picked up my coat, I picked up my daughter Rosalind, 7 months old, asleep against my shoulder, and I walked out of that house in 22 degrees of January air, and I did not look back. This is Family Revenge Stories New. I'm going to tell you what was inside that envelope. But first you need to understand what they took and who they tried to take it from. If you're new here, subscribe now. Justice doesn't rush, but it always arrives. I am a forensic accountant. I have been one for 14 years. My name is Merit Osebansu, and I built what I have from a 2-bedroom apartment in Gary, Indiana, a $40,000 salary, and a grandmother named Celestine who believed that precision was a form of love. I don't say this to impress you. I say it because the family I married into believed that competence without pedigree was a kind of forgery. Calloway's family, the Holloway Pratts, had money the way some families have weather, constantly and without earning it. A grandfather's pharmaceutical patent. Properties in 3 states. The kind of wealth that makes people confuse their luck with their character. And at the center of it, quiet and mostly invisible, was Calloway's grandmother, Eugenia, 81 years old. She had survived a first husband who drank, a second husband who wandered, and 60 years of being managed by a daughter-in-law who treated her like a piece of furniture that had outlived its style. Drusilla called her Grandma Jean, with the same warmth she used for the phrase "bless your heart." Eugenia called me Merit, which sounds simple, but in that family, calling someone by their actual name was a form of respect so rare it felt like a gift. "You're the only one who asks me questions and waits for the answer," Eugenia told me once. We were sitting on her narrow back porch in August, shelling butter beans into a colander, her hands moving faster than mine. I asked her to teach me. She laughed. "You just have to stop thinking about it like work." Rosalind was born in March. 6 pounds 4 ounces. She had Calloway's nose and my grandmother Celestine's eyes, that particular dark brown that looks almost amber in direct light. The first time Drusilla held her, she held her for approximately 45 seconds. Then she handed her back and said, "She doesn't look much like the Holloway side." Calloway said nothing. I noted it. Filed it. The invitation to Eugenia's 82nd birthday dinner came 3 weeks later. It was a formal invitation, printed and mailed, which should have told me everything. It listed a dress code, cocktail attire, as though this were a charity gala and not a birthday for a woman who wore house slippers until noon. It listed a start time of 7 p.m. It included, in handwritten ink at the bottom, a note from Drusilla. "Please arrange for Rosalind's care that evening. This is an adult occasion." My daughter was 4 months old. She was still nursing. I called Calloway. He said his mother was very particular about the ambience at formal dinners. He said it with the tone of a man who has been repeating someone else's words for so long he's forgotten they aren't his. I went anyway. I brought Rosalind anyway. Eugenia had called me the day before and said very quietly, "Bring the baby, Merit. I want to see her." That was the first time I understood that something in that family was already breaking, and Eugenia knew which way it would fall. The irony, the one I didn't fully appreciate until much later, was that the invitation's dress code listed cocktail attire as a requirement. It was a rule Drusilla had invented to perform exclusivity. It was also a rule that, in the end, put the right people in the same room at the right moment. I wore a black wrap dress. I carried Rosalind in a sling against my chest. I arrived at 7:04. The table seated 14. 11 chairs were filled. Eugenia sat at the far end, nearest the window that looked out over the back garden, and she lit up when she saw us come through the door. She reached out her hands, thin, steady, the same hands that had taught me to shell beans, and she held Rosalind's face between her palms and said, "There she is." Drusilla's jaw tightened. The dinner was roast lamb and fingerling potatoes and a green bean casserole no one touched. There was wine I didn't drink because I was nursing. There was a moment, midway through the main course, when Petra leaned across the table and said to her cousin Thaddeus, loudly enough for the whole table, "Cal says the baby's colic has been keeping them up." Which is interesting because the Holloway babies never had colic. A pause. Must come from the other side. The table did not go silent. That would have required people to admit they'd heard. Instead, the conversation simply bent around the comment the way water bends around a stone, and everyone looked at their plates, and Calloway looked at his wine glass, and only Eugenia looked at me. Her hands went still on her fork. "Thaddeus," she said, "pass me the potatoes." It wasn't a defense. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a woman of 82 years redirecting the room's attention with the authority of someone who has watched people perform cruelty at dinner tables for 6 decades and decided that the most devastating response is refusal to perform surprise. Drusilla waited until dessert. "We've been discussing," she said, "and that we carried the weight of something decided long before this table, whether it might make sense to do a paternity confirmation. For the estate. For the record." She looked at me with her hands folded. "It's nothing personal. It's just due diligence. Rosalind is Calloway's daughter," I said. "Of course. This would just confirm it. Formally. I'm sitting at your dinner table with a 4-month-old who has your son's nose, and you're asking me to prove she belongs here. I'm asking for documentation." Short sentences now. The room was very quiet. "No," I said. "That's..." "No." Petra said something about estate law. Thaddeus said something about precedent. Calloway looked at the window. One woman at the table, Calloway's Aunt Lorraine, his father's older sister, opened her mouth. She had the expression of a person who has something important to say. She closed it. I unclipped Rosalind from the sling. I stood. "Eugenia," I said. "Happy birthday." The beans were perfect. Eugenia looked at me with those clear eyes and said, "I know they were. I taught you. I left with my daughter. It was a choice. I want to be clear about that. I chose to leave the room. I was not expelled from it. There is a difference and I have never forgotten it." The months that followed had a specific shape. Calloway moved back to his mother's house in April. We didn't fight about it. He called it space to think. I called it what it was privately, and then I moved forward. The apartment cost $1,340 a month. My salary at the time was $87,000 a year. After daycare, $1,100 a month for the good place, the one near the park where they didn't use screens, and the car payment and the utilities and the student loan I was still paying for the degree that made the salary possible, I had approximately $600 a month left for food and incidentals. I became very good at a recipe Eugenia had given me the summer before. Red beans cooked low and slow with smoked turkey neck, served over rice with a splash of vinegar. It cost about $11 to make and lasted 4 days. I never complained. Complaining requires an audience. Drusilla called in June. She said the family wanted to move forward. She said that meant I needed to provide the DNA sample or sign a document waiving Rosalind's rights to the estate. "Which document?" I asked. She named it. I wrote it down. I looked it up. "I'll think about it," I said. The document sat on my desk for 6 weeks. I looked at it most mornings. It was a standard waiver of heirship, the kind used in estate proceedings, and it had been drafted by the family attorney. I noticed that it referred to Rosalind as the minor child of Calloway Holloway Pratt, which meant the family had already legally accepted her paternity. They just wanted to make sure she couldn't inherit. The document was the thing I kept returning to, not as a wound, as information. Eugenia called in August. "Merritt," she said, "I want to tell you something while I still can." She had been having some trouble with her heart. Not dramatic trouble, she was very matter-of-fact about it, but the kind that changes how a person organizes their thoughts. She told me about a small cedar box she kept in the drawer of her nightstand. She told me what was inside it. She told me that she had already spoken to an attorney, and that his name was Desmond Fairweather, and that his office was on the 4th floor of the building on Calloway Street, which was, she noted, a coincidence she found darkly funny. "What should I do with what you've told me?" I asked. "Nothing yet," she said. "Just know it's there." I thought about that cedar box all through September. It appeared in my mind at odd moments, while I was bathing Rosalind, while I was reviewing audit spreadsheets at 11 p.m., while I was eating beans and rice at the kitchen table of the apartment with the cracked tile near the sink that I'd asked the landlord to fix twice. If you've been following this story and you can feel the ground shifting, if you can feel the weight of what's in that box, even though I haven't told you yet, subscribe now so the rest of the story finds you. It's going to matter. Eugenia died on a Thursday in November. It was not unexpected. Her heart had been doing what hearts do when they decide they've done enough. Rosalind was 10 months old and had just learned to pull herself to standing, and she had never met a surface she didn't want to grip. The service was at the church on Millbrook Road, the one with the stone steps and the drafty vestibule where Eugenia had attended services for 51 years. I sat in the third pew with Rosalind on my lap. Calloway sat with his family in the first two pews and did not look back. After the service, there was a reception at Drusilla's house. I was not invited. I stood on the stone steps with Rosalind and said goodbye to Eugenia in my own way, which involved no performance and a great deal of standing still in the cold, looking at the pattern the bare oak branches made against a white sky. I went home and made a pot of red beans. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Desmond Fairweather, attorney at law, 4th floor, Calloway Street. He asked if I could come in. The conference room had a long table, not mahogany, just oak, the practical kind, and when I arrived there were already 7 people seated: Drusilla, Petra, Calloway, Thaddeus, Lorraine, and 2 people I didn't recognize but who turned out to be Eugenia's son from her first marriage, a man named Warren Pritt, and his daughter Sylvie, who had driven in from Columbus. Desmond Fairweather was a man in his 60s with the deliberate calm of someone who has read many wills to many families and has stopped being surprised by any of them. He thanked everyone for coming. He placed a folder on the table. Then he placed a small cedar box next to the folder. I recognized it immediately. My chest did not move for a full breath. Desmond said, "Mrs. Eugenia Holloway Pratt left a revised will, executed 14 months ago, which supersedes all prior documents. Before I read it, there is a document inside this box that she asked to be read aloud first. She was very specific about this." Drusilla said, "What kind of document?" "A DNA certificate," Desmond said. "And a letter." The certificate was from Holloway Regional Genetic Diagnostics, the same clinic whose name had been on the envelope Drusilla had slid across the table toward me 9 months earlier. The same clinic. Different subject. Eugenia had submitted her own DNA. And Warren Pritt's. The results showed a 0% probability of shared parentage between Eugenia and Calloway's father, Reginald Holloway Pratt. Reginald was not Warren's half-brother. He was not Eugenia's biological son. He had been adopted, privately, quietly in 1959, and Eugenia had kept this information in a cedar box for 63 years because Reginald's father had made her promise, and she had honored it, and then she had decided at 81 years old that the promise had lasted long enough. The letter was 2 pages in Eugenia's handwriting. I will not reproduce it here. But it ended with this: the Holloway blood they kept talking about was never theirs to claim. The only one at this table who never asked about blood was Merritt. And she's the only one who earned a place in my memory. Drusilla stood. Her chair scraped the floor. "This is," she said. "This is not. The estate," Desmond continued, unaffected, "is divided as follows." He read the numbers. "I will give you the relevant ones. The property in Evanston and the investment account totaling $1.4 million were divided between Warren Pritt and Rosalind Osei Pratt, in equal shares, to be administered by Desmond's firm until Rosalind reached 25 years of age." Petra's face went the particular color that faces go when the body is trying to decide between fury and grief and can't choose. Thaddeus looked at the table. Lorraine, Calloway's Aunt Lorraine, who had opened her mouth at the birthday dinner and closed it, put her hand over her eyes. Calloway looked at his hands. His hands were very still. I had the waiver of heirship in my bag. The one Drusilla had sent me in June, that I had not signed, that referred to Rosalind as the minor child of Calloway Holloway Pratt. I placed it on the table. You drafted this, I said to Drusilla. You called it documentation. You named her your grandchild in a legal document to try to cut her out. I kept my voice at its normal register. Eugenia called her family because she meant it. I paused. She told me, you just have to stop thinking about it like work. I picked up the waiver of heirship and put it back in my bag. I looked at Calloway for a moment, not with anger, just with the clear-eyed recognition of a forensic accountant who has finished reviewing a ledger. Then I thanked Desmond Fairweather for his time, put on my coat and walked out. Drusilla's attorney filed a challenge to the will within 30 days. The challenge was dismissed within 90. The legal basis they had attempted to use, a claim that Eugenia had lacked capacity when she revised the will, was contradicted by 3 witnesses including Desmond, including a geriatric physician, and including a notarized statement Eugenia had prepared specifically anticipating the challenge. She had known. She had built the floor before she let them dance on it. The property in Evanston is held in trust. The account grows. Rosalind will be 25 in the year 2047, and by then, if Desmond's firm does its job correctly, the inheritance will be worth considerably more. Calloway and I finalized our divorce in July of the following year. He did not contest custody. He sees Rosalind on alternating weekends, and he is, within those parameters, decent to her. I did not pursue child support beyond what the standard calculation required. I was not generous about it. I was fair. Those are different things, but they can look similar from a distance, and I've stopped caring which one people think it is. Drusilla sent a card that Christmas. Inside it said, "We could put this behind us if you were willing to be reasonable." I read it once. I put it in the recycling. I did not respond. That was the mercy I offered. The next communication she received from me was through my attorney, and it was not the kind that leaves room for interpretation. Warren Pritt and I speak occasionally. He's a retired postal worker from Columbus, and he has his mother's hands and her particular quality of stillness. He came to visit last spring and sat at my kitchen table while I made the red beans, and he told me stories about Eugenia that I hadn't heard, and Rosalind, nearly 2 years old by then, opinionated and loud about it, climbed into his lap and fell asleep there while he talked. She knew what she was doing, he said. She always did, I said. Rosalind is 3.5 now. She has learned to shell butter beans. She does it the way Eugenia taught me, without thinking about it like work, which is to say she treats it as conversation, her small hands moving while she tells me about whatever is important to her in that moment, which varies by the day but is always delivered with complete conviction. Last Tuesday it was the color of clouds. The week before it was whether earthworms have feelings. I don't know the answer to either question. I told her so. She accepted this with the equanimity of someone who has not yet learned that uncertainty is supposed to be uncomfortable. The cedar box sits on my bookshelf. It's empty now. But I kept it because Eugenia kept it and she kept things that mattered. The DNA test they tried to use as a weapon, the one Drusilla slid across the table like an accusation, turned out to be the instrument they handed me. They just hadn't read the fine print on whose blood it would actually trace. If you made it to the end of this story, I want you to do one thing. Think of the person in your life who is present in all the small ways, the ones who ask questions and wait for the answer. Call them today. Not because something is wrong. Because Eugenia Holloway Pratt spent 82 years being underestimated in a house full of people who claimed to love her, and the person who shelled beans with her on a back porch in August was the one who showed up. If this story meant something to you, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I'll see you in the next one.